A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Welcome to episode 8 of A Cricketing View podcast. My guest today is Suresh Menon. Suresh has been an observer of Indian cricket and of the BCCI for decades now. He writes a regular column for The Hindu titled Between Wickets, which I read, and he's also associated with the Wisden India Almanac. Welcome, Suresh. Very wonderful to
Thanks so
have you.
much, Karthik. Lovely to be here.
These are momentous times in the BCCI, aren't they? The new constitution and then the first former India captain becoming BCCI president in modern times.
Well, when you put it specifically like that, yes, these are momentous times. But if you wait for another couple of weeks, the momentous times will be back to the old times if the BCCI has its way.
The BCCI deep state seems to have its own life. It seems to be able to sort of withstand the vicissitudes of other powerful institutions like the Supreme Court. And
The reason actually is simple, because this cricket is the one thing that unites the ruling party, the opposition, the hangers-on, the fringe parties, all of them, because they all have a stake in it in some way or the other, in some state or the other. So every time there is a move towards reform, they fight against it, and things never get really done. So we are now in a funny state where, yes, we have a former cricketer as the president of the board, and the former cricketer as the president of the board is beginning to behave exactly like former presidents of the board who were not cricketers, but played political games. So it's back to the old whatever.
what does that say about the old whatever? This is something I want to explore here. But what is our expectation of the old whatever, and what does the fact that Saurav Ganguly has, in the very first AGM after he took over as BCCI president, approved changes which basically dilute the Lodha reforms, and they're now going to put them to a vote. They're going to get into a court battle about them, probably. What does that say about what the imaginary BCCI is in our minds as cricket fans and the actual institution? What is the gap there? Is there a gap?
It's like this. Cricket fans are some of the most optimistic breed of people on earth, especially Indian cricket fans, and especially certainly cricket fans of my generation and maybe a slightly younger generation, because in the old days, there was no question of winning matches. There was no question of winning series. It was enough if Gavaskar made 100, if Vishwanath made 100, and if we fought sort of valiantly. And this was a big thing. We lose a test match in Headingley by an innings or something, but Tiger Pataudi makes 140, and that was a huge thing. So it's been. I think our expectations in the early days were limited, which meant that the official BCCI, the officialdom in BCCI, were perfectly happy to play their little games. Now what has happened is that the Indian team is doing remarkably well, and but the response from the fans is the same. The fans are telling themselves, it doesn't matter, these guys have their fights and their politics and whatever, but India is winning, so it doesn't matter. So it didn't matter when India were losing, and doesn't matter when India is winning. So despite 24-hour television and everything, and the media and everything, the board thinks that it can take advantage of this, and make sure that they don't get sort of the focus on themselves so much. I also have another theory, which in recent years has is that we had this wonderful story. When we were children, we read this wonderful story about the King Vikramaditya, who always spoke the truth, who always pronounced judgments that were absolutely fair and so on. And years later, when he died or whatever, and there was a little mound, and there was a little boy, shepherd boy, who sat on it. And as soon as he sat on it, he would only speak the truth. He would only provide the perfect judgments, etc. The moment he moved away from there, he became just like anybody else. So that was how powerful King Vikramaditya was. And I think the board is a bit like that. Whatever happens, Saurav Ganguly might be a cricketer, respected cricketer outside of all that. Others might have their own, businessmen or whatever, politicians outside that. As soon as they sit on this BCCI mound, so to say, they become BCCI. They become exactly like the officials of BCCI of the last 7, 8 decades. So there's something, I don't know, to answer your question, I don't know what it is that I think what they realize is that, oh, we have the power to do things. We have the power to keep ourselves in power. And why should we let it go? We'd be foolish if we let it go. So it's a whole lot of things, forces working at the same time, which is why when you say momentous, yes, but with reservations.
What is the power of the BCCI president? I mean, it's an honorary position. It's an elected position. So presumably you have to keep your constituents happy. You have to keep the members happy. You have to allocate matches for them. You have to make sure that they get a fair shake in the domestic tournaments. You have to distribute money in a way which they will consider as fair. You have to protect them when they get into trouble, and so on and so forth. And even with the constitutional reforms, that basic sort of relationship, which makes it very difficult for top-down, wholesale top-down change, has not changed, isn't it? It's still there. It's still a member association.
It is still very much a member association, and the fact that the president or the office bearers aren't actually paid, except for the selectors, and that's not a great deal of money. But what happens is they have access to huge amounts of funds, which they can then very generously distribute to sort of keep everybody happy, as you said, and make sure that the opposition doesn't get too strong. And the politicians jump into it. As I was saying earlier, this is one thing that unites all the parties, because everybody has a stake in it, which is also the reason why the reforms don't go beyond a particular point.
I do want to get into the history of the BCCI because I think you've been watching the institution for a long time. You were talking about how people who are otherwise prone to radical ideas and forward thinking, once they become BCCI officials, it's like an avatar which shapes all their behavior, seemingly.
That is the power of the BCCI, which, to answer an earlier question of yours, that is the power of the BCCI. The BCCIfication of people who come into those positions is one of the more fascinating aspects of cricket administration in the country.
The history of cricket administration is a history of where the patronage has come from, isn't it? I mean, in the early days, it was the princely states and the princelings. After independence, it was the corporations. And so the game grew in the big cities because that's where the corporations had their offices. Mafatlal, Nirlon, State Bank of India. Then cable television came along. And so now, isn't that where the power really is?
Well, cable television has the power in certain ways, and you probably put your finger on it, but I don't think they quite realize what that power is and how they can use it. Like power in any context, I mean, it can be used either to ensure that things go on smoothly, or it can be used as part of the BCCIfication process, which is that even in the days of the Maharajas, for example, the Patialas and the Vizayanagarams didn't do it because they wanted to do something for the game. That was an aspect of it. But the larger issue involved was ego, to show the power, to flex muscle, and that sort of thing. And that is a BCCI legacy too. The theory is still remains the same. And this wonderful theory that's been going around for a few years now, that only cricketers can make good administrators, is ridiculous, because they're two completely different jobs. If cricketers make good administrators, like for example, Anil Kumble was the president of the Karnataka State Cricket Association, Javgal Srinath was the secretary. Before them, Brijesh Patel was the president. There's a certain informed decision making that is not always available when they are thrown into other spheres. So I don't know. That's a bit of wishful thinking, really.
We often decry, Mr. Shah and Mr. Modi and Mr. Pawar and various party politicians and running for BCCI office or, MCA office or Gujarat office, or, we decry Mr. Srinivasan or, there's no reason for India Cements, for instance, to get involved in cricket any more than there is for the BJP or the Congress to get involved in cricket directly. But this is not new, isn't it? I mean, Mr.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Salve,
exactly my point. Yes, it's not
Mr.
new.
Salve and Mr. Scindia were all ministers in the government. Why has the BCCIA remained private and B attracted the attention of political power or those pursuing political power?
Because of the enormous publicity, free publicity they get, because of the enormous influence they have. I mean, look at the amount of monies that keep floating around. I mean, forget the television money. I mean, just I think the average office bearer, virtually for the period that he's in office, virtually doesn't have to spend for anything else. Plus, he has the advantage of walking shoulder to shoulder with Virat Kohli and stuff like that, and that's a huge thing. That's a huge, especially I don't know. I asked Greg Chappell this many years ago. I don't know. I don't know if it's unique to India. I don't know if this sort of fame or fortune by connection, so to say, is unique to India, or whether it's a part of human nature. Greg thought that it wasn't unique, but it was extra loaded in India, and I suppose that's part of it too. I mean, for example, let me give you an example. Someone like N. Srinivasan, who was the president, secretary, and then president, and who really would have continued as everything in the old BCCI fashion if he hadn't gone out to support his son-in-law in the IPL sort of betting scam, and he insisted on that. He put sort of family before propriety or whatever. But the important thing is, Srinivasan himself is, I think, this is a personal view, is not financially corrupt, and he has genuinely done a lot for cricket at a very basic level, at the club level, at the grassroots level, which is the cliche. Wants to have a legacy, as he once said, leave a legacy behind for Indian cricket. Unfortunately, he had this other problem, and equally unfortunately, I think a lot of people who have replaced him or are aspiring to replace him or hope that he is out of the picture do not have his kind of genuine interest in the sport. So these are the things you've got to balance out. I mean, right now he's probably sitting and working out how the old order can remain come back as a new order, because he's a man. He's an extremely intelligent man who has done this before, who knows how to do things, who knows what shall I say, where the bodies are buried. So it's a fascinating. I find him extremely fascinating. I've probably written more criticizing him over the years than anyone else. He knows how to tap a person's weakness, and I think that's one of the things that has kept the old order going in the BCCI. It's a fascinating game of wait, my time will come, as he's supposed to have said after the recent BCCI elections. Apparently, he's supposed to have said, sort of channeling his inner Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's supposed to have said, "We are back." So,
I mean, it's hard to argue with that.
He's a fabulous study, actually. I think he's a terrific study in this all these things that you're looking at. The why do things happen and how are they made to happen? I think it's a fascinating study.
I mean, it's hard to argue with him. I mean, he is back right now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
But I am increasingly fascinated by fandom and what people expect and how people see institutions like the BCCI. And there seems to be this idea that some kind of frictionless, quote unquote, governance is possible. And it seems to me that there's a tension between, this idea of governance and the reality of politics. And I wonder whether in this aspiration for, the perfect governor, the perfect savior, this is what I think is behind a lot of the optimism behind Sourav Ganguly, that somehow he'll be able to glide above the realities of political gravity and just do things because they are the right thing to do, as if that is a settled idea, that it is known what the right things are. It's just a matter of someone doing them. And I wonder whether the way we talk about these things does a disservice to politics sometimes. Because politics is not a bad thing, right? Politics is still the best way we've invented so far of negotiating power.
Exactly. No, I get what you're saying, and I agree with it to a large extent. That, and that's not just true of this case, not just true of cricket administration versus the ideal versus the reality. I suppose that's true of CEOs of big companies and prime ministers and presidents, and I think that's a part of the human condition. Part of the sort of what shall I say, irrational belief in this is caused by what I think is you need to have some area which an artificial area like sport, for example, where you can sort of pour in all these wonderful human qualities and all these wonderful qualities that make you feel happy or virtuous or superior or whatever to the lesser animals, and sport is an excellent field for that, because the guy takes a catch or first bounce, and umpire gives the batsman out, so the fielder, because he's virtuous and because it is sport, recalls him, and that's a wonderful thing to do, because it's the right thing to do, to go back to your phrase, that is the right and proper thing to do. And sport gives you an opportunity to do the right thing, to do the proper thing. And I think we make the mistake of extending that kind of philosophy into sports administration.
Right.
And because sport is played in one way, we expect the administration and the administrators to be to play along the same lines, and that, as you said, seldom happens. And I think there is either disappointment because of the expectation, or there is largely indifference. It doesn't matter what happens in the BCCI, as I was saying earlier, so long as India wins test matches and one-day matches and World Cups and stuff, which is wonderful. Because I remember writing when the IPL scandal broke, I remember saying that I have 2 invitations for the IPL final, but as a mark of protest, and this is on an online platform, is that as a mark of protest, I shall not be going for the IPL match. And I don't think, and various things, but the gist of it being, I don't think I should be going for this IPL match, despite being invited. And within about three minutes of that appearing online, I had about 200 calls asking me, can I have those passes? Some of us at least, tend to, as you say, and I get you perfectly there. Some of us tend to expect a lot, whereas things are just as they are, because that's how A, they have been, and B, they are most likely to be. So the exception is not the guy who plays into the politics of the system. The exception is the guy who rises above that, and those are very few. And I think overall the fan is saying, well, as long as the game doesn't suffer. I don't even know if he's actually rationalizing it like that. He probably thinks sort of instinctively, probably thinks, as long as the game is fine, as long as I can watch so many matches on television every year, so long as I can go and watch some matches live, so long as there's fun and games with the IPL, it doesn't matter to me, whether Sourav Ganguly has made political deals, or whether Srinivasan is pulling the strings from the back, or whether India is fighting with the BCCI is fighting with the ICC all the time. It doesn't matter to me, because my interest is basically cricket, and I'm not going to fill my head with all this other stuff. Well, that's also a fairly comfortable and consistent philosophy.
That's been quite striking, because if you talk to Chennai Super Kings fans, and this is a new cult in the game in this decade,
Yes.
uh, they don't mind the fact that Mr. Srinivasan still owns the franchise.
No,
Uh, you
exactly,
know,
exactly. And he has
and
done a lot of good. He has done a lot
yeah,
of good for cricket in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu, which people are aware of. And he has helped out people. He has. I mean, he to some extent, Mr. Jagmohan Dalmia was like that. A
yeah,
cricketer could take up an issue to him, a problem, and he would, if not through the system, at least personally help out. Of course, the Chennai Super King fan is a completely different animal because you don't get that kind of passion anywhere else in the country, among any
yeah.
of the other IPL teams. So that's a slightly different. I mean, it's not a uh, normal, in inverted commas, reaction in the country. For him, it makes perfect sense to accept the good and the bad and decide that that's fine. I mean, I don't even know if it's bad, but I accept the whole picture, which is a wonderful philosophy too.
It is a wonderful philosophy. Well, the paradoxical thing in it is that the same Chennai Super Kings fan who's completely on board with, oh, well, oh, it's fine, Srinivasan owns it. Oh, fine, the new temporary franchise in Pune, we killed it off, and now,
Yeah.
Dhoni is back with us.
Hmm.
Excellent, all good. This is the same fan who holds up in Ganguly the hope of, that frictionless master administrator, who will, wave a wand and everything will be well. And sometimes I think that both of these are essentially the same point of view.
Yes.
It's sort of the same. I mean, cricket seems to be a repository of all our fantasies, in these very, very weird ways. And it's not just about, Virat Kohli's cover drive or, Tendulkar's straight drive. This platonic ideal of things will just work out. I don't want to know the details. I don't want to know
Exactly.
anything.
Spare me the details. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think there's one sort of element that has not been given its credit uh, in this whole business in the last. I'm just talking about the last few years. The fact that the Indian cricket team has been doing well
Yeah.
under Dhoni, under Virat, it's been doing exceptionally well. They've been number one, etc. They won World Cups, Champions Trophy, etc. My sort of feeling is that were India not to do so well, were India to be losing series after series, not qualifying for World Cup knockouts, etc., etc. If the team were doing really badly, then questions would be asked in Parliament, and people would burn effigies and that sort of thing. And that is when the BCCI's activities, actions, acts would all come into the focus. But as I've written many times earlier, the BCCI has been incredibly lucky that the cricket boys, the boys in the field, have really saved them from a lot of embarrassment simply by
Yeah.
doing as well as they have.
That's true. That's true. I think in the current era, especially under Dhoni and Kohli in the
Yeah, I'm
current
talking about
decade,
this limitedly, last decade or so. Yes.
even in the Ganguly era, when there were a couple of years when the results were really sketchy. The results were good in 2002 and
Yeah.
2003. Either side of that, it was all quite below. Like, we were losing more than we were winning, India. And at the beginning of this decade, there was a 12, 15-month period when everybody was suddenly very old together, and we realized that everybody was at the end, within a few months of each other. And it has always struck me that at times like that, the BCCI is very, very good at protecting the players.
Oh, yes.
It's like they close ranks and they shut shop, and they don't do knee-jerk things like Pakistan will sack a captain
Yeah.
like every 6 months, just like you know for no good reason, really. That they drop perfectly good players for no good reason. One of the things that has always it seems to me, at least in my lifetime, is that the BCCI has always understood that the national, like the senior men's team, is their golden goose, and that must be protected at all costs. That must be, there's a line below
Yes.
that, and there's no nonsense with that.
No, I think
And they,
that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true, and that's a very sort of pragmatic approach. See, the whole idea of the BCCI is not that they're a bunch of politicians who have no interest in the game. And also, please remember that despite everything, despite all these things and all these terrible things that that have happened and that one has talked about, the fact is that the BCI is still the best run sports body in the country. They have a system in place. There is a definite sort of graduation from the junior levels to the international level. There are tournaments, there are age group tournaments, there's the National Coaching Academy, there are national coaching schools. A first class cricketer who sees a career of about, say, 15 to 20 years can make a living out of the game.
Yeah.
As
Very
a
good
player.
living now.
And a good living now, which is not something that can be said about sportsmen in any other sport. Of course, tennis players do that, but that's in their individual capacity, and the national body has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, in other sports, you have to basically be an international competitor to
You have to be an
do it.
international competitor, and you have to be your own man. You cannot depend on the national body.
Because and there it seems to me that the iceberg and not just the tip, which is the top 3 or 4 officials of the BCCI. That's the engine which runs all this, isn't it? I mean, because the BCCI has all these tentacles. I always think of Jasprit Bumrah in this context,
Yes.
because Jasprit Bumrah on the one hand is this poster child of the IPL, discovered by John Wright on one of his scouting missions for Mumbai Indians. That it's the perfect story for how corporate uh, investment, helps, blah 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 blah, right? But the point is that John Wright, the most he could do for Mumbai Indians was point at Jasprit Bumrah.
Yeah.
When games have to be produced for Jasprit Bumrah to actually play and develop, those games are all Gujarat Cricket Association games, or India under age group games, or
Yes.
India A games, or Syed Mushtaq Ali games, or whatever. So that machinery, someone is funding it, someone is making sure that all those trains run on time. Someone is making sure that where cricketers used to basically come from, Bombay between, say, Nariman Point and Bandra, and some parts of Bangalore, and some parts of Chennai, and some parts of Calcutta, and some parts of Delhi, and some parts in Punjab, and some parts in Rajkot, and the old legacies left behind by the kings and princes, that players are coming from other places as well. Someone has made sure of that. And there it seems to me that there's a whole lower level BCCI tentacles, the tentacles of the BCCI octopus, which never seem to sort of figure in the public imagination of the BCCI. So I keep wondering whether it's a matter of presentation in so many ways. In other words, does BCCI need its Ken Burns?
I think BCCI needs to talk up its its achievements rather than leave it to people like me to talk about the more negative areas. But the fact remains that in today's atmosphere, in today's cricketing world in India, it is virtually impossible for a talent to slip through the system.
Yeah.
And that is saying a huge thing when you put in the fact that the country is so huge that talent could emerge from areas where cricket might not even be played. I mean, this is where television comes in. A lot of that generation of cricketers, the ones you're talking about, the Tendulkars and Dravids and Dhonis and that generation, they grew up inspired by the 1983 World Cup win. and that's that's the role that television has played. Then what happened? Then at another sort of equally sort of important sort of formula, so to say, in this is that when a person does well from a particular part of the country, he inspires people in the same area. I mean, Kerala, when I was growing up, Kerala was considered, not just when I was growing up, when I started working, Kerala was considered the backwaters. I mean, my grandparents, when I visited Kerala, would say that cricket is only played by madmen. That's football is the only sport. But now Kerala has produced, in the last few years, Kerala has begun to produce cricketers of international renown. And I think the system, as you said, the system ensures that nobody slips through. I mean, in the old days, even in the big centers, even in the major centers, you could have somebody who was ignored, or who didn't make it beyond a particular level because of either politics or lack of information, or because the parents felt that the academic life was better suited, or the person himself thought there's nothing in sport for him. But that is no longer the case now, because as soon as and there are these scouts, as you say, there are these scouts who are sort of fanned out across the country, and not just IPL, which also has a strong sort of scouting system, but even the average sort of Ranji team like Karnataka. I don't think even the majority of cricketers come from Bangalore. They come from all over, and this I think began to happen to a large extent under Sourav Ganguly, who encouraged people from Butch and Jalandhar and Palarivattam and stuff and places like that, which there was hardly any cricket being played there. The system is very strong. Even if a person looks like he's going to be missed out because of the politics in a particular place, he's got enormous choice. He can shift his state. He can go to another place, or within the system, because thanks to the same politics, if X thinks that Y is not good enough, there's always A or B or C who thinks that of course Y is good enough. Yeah. If for no other reason than to tell X that he doesn't know his game. You know what I'm saying? So it's a self-correcting system in that sense.
What seems to have happened is a massive expansion of the game. Because we used to always talk about well, we are a nation of 1 billion people, and Australia is a nation of 11 million or whatever it is now, 17 million. And how can they beat us? But the point is, in cricket terms, we used to be a nation of only about 10 or 12 million.
That's true. In fact, amazingly, I saw a television program on one of the Australian channels, or it might have been a newspaper video, where serious Australian cricketers and writers sat down after India's tour of Australia and said something that I had heard only the reverse of, which is that they were saying that I think it's time we began to copy a system like India's. So there you go. Victory is the ultimate solvent. It's sort of it's a solution for everything, and everybody wants to know what that secret is.
Did money really free the BCCI, or was there always this impulse to expand, or was it a holding operation for many years in the 70s or 80s?
I think to a large extent it probably happened in the mid-90s when television came into it in a big way, because in the old days, in the days of Doordarshan covering cricket, the board had to actually pay Doordarshan to report the matches, and it was a huge sort of huge mental sort of shift to imagine that the reverse could happen, manifold, and so many times more than they thought possible. So I think television, cable television, India winning the World Cup, and the fact that BCCI realized that we've been putting the cart before the horse and all this, that's a wrong way of going about things. They began to sell the game much better than they'd ever done before. there wasn't really that much money for. I mean, there's a famous story that Bishan Bedi loves to say, where he says that they used to get 250 rupees a day per test match, and they beat New Zealand in 4 days. So their fifth day's pay was docked. So stuff like that. So it's not a sort of a continuum from the sort of 70s, 80s into the 90s, 70s, 80s, and then the sudden sort of, enormous jump.
Yeah, so it was sort of a conceptual shift more than an economic shift.
Yeah, because things fell into place. A whole lot of things fell into place, which didn't happen or wasn't possible in the 70s.
Speaking of the conceptual shift, one of the sort of the common refrains of every single BCCI president, in the last 20 years, actually going even further back, starting from the first Dalmia regime, has been about India's position in the world game. And last week or 2 weeks ago, it happened again with Sourav Ganguly saying, well, the ICC has to give us more money. And now, the big three boards are saying, well, the ICC can't have this extra tournament because, when the ICC has an extra tournament, the ICC makes the money and we don't make the money. And, we want to use the calendar to make money ourselves, and not why should we play for the ICC when we are already doing so much. In most of these arguments, so far, there has always been a corrective voice within the BCCI, right? So when Mr. Srinivasan was trying to get away with the Mayappan thing, with his, sham inquiry and the report which came out in like a few days, which said, nothing to see here, it's all very nice, wonderful. There was someone in BCCI who took him to court.
Yes.
Right. And that's how this whole Mudgal Lodha story started. But in this one area where it's BCCI against the ICC, is there a corrective voice? Because I'll tell you why. Because I did an episode with Daniel Norcross, and he's a test match special commentator. Yeah. But one of the things he said, and it stayed with me, is this idea that for the game to thrive, it has to stay competitive. So the BCCI can, blow everybody out of the water by having this enormous pool of talent and, build 2 test teams which will beat everybody in the world in the near future. In the next 10 years, that's probably going to happen if the current trends continue. But if they have nobody to play against, this is going to be a problem, right? So now to us as outsiders looking in and hobbyists who are obsessive about cricket, we can see the wisdom of this point, right? That you need like a pool of teams which will be roughly competitive so that, the cricket is firstly fun and be competitive and, it's interesting to the public. But is there a voice within BCCI which understands this? Or is this likely to be a BCCI blind spot?
I see there's a whole lot of new faces in the BCCI right now. Yeah. A, and B, we don't yet know who has been upset by what has been done in which corner of India by the BCCI or any of its affiliates. So I think it may not be a fair thing to say, but I think that some of the dissenting voices that you spoke about were not dissenting so much on behalf of the sport as on behalf of themselves, which is also fine. Which is fine too. I mean, if in the larger interests of cricket, your personal interests help, fair enough.
Yeah.
So therefore, right now in this particular setup, the BCCI and its affiliates across the country are so happy that they have finally regained control of cricket in the country, that there may not immediately be any sort of which is why I wrote in a piece today where I said that the BCCI needs 3/4, 75% assent to all these changes that they are planning in their constitution. But they might well get 100%, because I can't really see anybody who has an objection to, keeping the Supreme Court out, continuing beyond the age of 70, cutting down on this whole cooling off period and stuff like that. So whatever reform is an offshoot of personal ambition will be carried out. But whatever reform affects them, or on the other hand doesn't affect them, that they're indifferent to, may not find a voice. So that's really, I think, the position right now.
Yeah, because I mean, I think you're exactly right about this. Because when the whole announcement came with Mr. Shah and Mr. Ganguly and all the others, and it turned out that none of the positions were contested.
Yes.
It did suggest that they all agreed about some important thing.
And everybody got something.
So which was more important to them than contesting for the top job.
Exactly.
This is the whole premise of the BCCI being organized as a federation of members, isn't it? That some collective interest emerges through the contestation of individual interests.
Exactly.
Right? There's some majority somewhere or some consensus somewhere, and things which don't have a majority have no chance. But nevertheless, that dissenting voice remains. It's not, and that disputing voice in every meeting, everywhere, the person will lose, but he will say, I disagree, blah 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 blah, right? And of course, whether it's minuted or not, whether all the shenanigans, the usual shenanigans which happen in this, where as the saying goes, minutes are about protecting officials, not recording the reality, so on and so forth. All these things will happen, but this is where I think this it seems to me is one of the BCCI's blind spots, for which it is not designed to encounter, which is its relationship to the rest of the world. And if it becomes like this gigantic monster, then it may not realize that devouring everybody else is not in its best interest.
What the BCCI has done cleverly is got on board Australia and England.
Yeah.
So now, however you look at it, they are the big three. Till India-Pakistan matches are played again. I mean, that will be bigger than any of these other things. But the point is that India are in a wonderful position to, and have been for some time, to bully, to force other countries to do what they want, and that has also now reached a stage where they don't even have to do anything. Other countries will assume what India wants to do and do it themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a position that I personally think is not good for cricket as a sport. But from an Indian perspective, the argument has always been, when Australia and England had the veto power, this is exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
So my argument is that these things are in
cycles.
Cycles. They come in circular things, and at some point when it's not that these other countries are in love with India. They're in love with India's money, which is something that India have to realize, and they have to make that distinction clear in their own minds. At some point, if it happens that India doesn't have the kind of power it does now, then all these other countries will easily gang up, and you would have set back cricket for a number. India will recover, but you would have set back cricket for quite a period of time. So it's a difficult thing. It may not happen. It may not happen in our lifetimes, for example.
Yeah.
But it could at some. You have created a system where it could possibly happen in the future. Maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 decades later. But if the argument it's a climate change argument. If the argument is that it's not going to happen to me, and I'm sure the 50 years down the line they'll find a solution for it, then there's little you can do.
Finally, I want to sort of look to the future, and I want to do it through this question, and it's the question of club versus country. And BCCI has already confronted this question in an interesting way, in that there was a ruling against the BCCI by the Competition Commission, which basically turned on the question of, can the BCCI simultaneously be a regulator and a proprietor? So can it own the IPL and regulate cricket at the same time? This is the same as the Air India story. Can the government regulate airlines and own its own airline and so on? And politically and in broader fields like medicine and stuff, there is an argument for a public alternative to private competition because it keeps the private competition honest and so on and so forth by providing a non-profit alternative. But is there a conflict there, and how does the club versus country equation play out in the future? What are the interests? How does the BCCI balance the interests of the international game versus the interests of the IPL, for example? Because increasingly the IPL is producing more revenue, more cable revenue, more, and there's going to be a clamor for expansion. It's going to go to 10 and then 12 and then 6 weeks and then 8 weeks and then 10 weeks, and the one finite element in all this is the calendar. There are only 365 days in the year, and Virat Kohli can only be flogged so many times. Right? You can't flog him like 10 months of the year. Right? He won't survive that, even with his enormous fitness. So this is a problem in the future. Right? It seems to me this is the big flashpoint of the coming decade for the BCCI. They are the ones who have to resolve this, right? Because they have the power right now to shape what the next generation's Chris Gales and the next generation's Brendan McCullums and the next generation's Lasith Malingas do, isn't it?
Exactly. And to be honest, I don't think they've given it a thought, because it's a question right now of let's not rock the boat, while the going is good, etc. But the fact is that it is a huge question that there's actually two ways of looking at it. A player. I mean, I know players who would rather play the IPL than slog their way through getting into the Indian team, etc., etc. And you are going to have a situation where you cannot. You can of course write out all kinds of contracts with the national team, but you cannot do much about the next generation, next level of players. So how are you going to stop a good Ranji player from you can't keep him from his livelihood, and which is an old argument that cricket has faced before. So what happens is that's it. So that's one sort of scenario. Another scenario is that you can there could be an overkill of IPL. There could be nobody knows, obviously. Nobody can work out what is that optimum point of balance between so many days of IPL, so many teams, so many tournaments, so many matches versus international. I mean, you can sort of see the RCB Bangalore getting support over 6 weeks in a year or whatever, 8 weeks in a year over a period. But I cannot really see RCB, let's assume that, they've decided, board decides, or it has come to pass that 365 days of IPL you're going to have in a year. And the RCB supporter is guaranteed a match every 3 days or whatever throughout the year. I mean, that's clearly overkill, and that's clearly something that's going to put him off. Therefore, you work backwards. At what point does it not become? Does it sort of tip over? And I don't think that the board has even thought of these things. I don't think the board has even worked out scenarios, possibilities, A, B, C, D over, because the IPL success itself initially came as a huge surprise, and then IPL became this huge thing that is so huge that now the board has been, in that sense, protecting its players, refusing them permission to play in other leagues across the world. And increasingly, it might come to pass that the respective, like in soccer, the respective sort of T20 leagues across the world will be the ones that finally call the shots 50 years from now or whatever. But what is to India's advantage right now, short term, is that they are very strong supporters of Test match cricket.
Yeah.
New president is, the old president was, the captain is, and this is a very definite thing. I mean, they want to play Test matches. And the other IPL, I mean, they very cutely call it a domestic tournament and that sort of thing. But the fact is, but to come back to your sort of philosophical question of how can BCCI both run and regulate the IPL, I don't know the sort of what the legal position would be if somebody, again, like one of our gentlemen who did it earlier, took the BCCI to court and said, you can't run the IPL because of this. There is a fundamental sort of conflict of interest here, and how are you going to sort that out? So interesting days ahead. I mean, if nothing, I mean, we live, as the old saying goes, we live in interesting times, certainly.
There's this image of the BCCI as the zombie deep state, never changing, timeless political institution. Internally, it has its politics and its dispute resolution, let's call them mechanisms. And, it has its system of consensus and argument. And it seems that out of all this emerges, this world of cricket as we see it. Do we need to understand this world better, or do they need to change the way they behave?
Oh, if we do not understand this world better, they're not going to change the way they behave. I think we've got to, both have to come together if it really has to make a difference. Because understanding that better is a useful tool towards hoping that things change from the BCCI side. And I think what the Supreme Court once tried to do, and now I don't know where that they stand on the whole issue, is to drag the BCCI kicking and screaming into the 21st century, and it's been a long and often painful process. But have we got anywhere? I mean, that's really the question.
I think we are all living in the BCCI century.
If that were true, that's fine too. But unfortunately, which ties up with your original question about do we expect too much of the BCCI? Perhaps we do, and perhaps we should.
Yeah.
I mean, indifference is a great motivator for the other well, I wouldn't like to say other side, but for the other set of people that who you ought to be interested in more deeply.
On that note, Mr. Menon, thank you very much. This has been a great pleasure.
Thanks, Karthik. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.